Boy, this is going to feel like Groundhog Day. We had to retape the whole first half of the show because otherwise you wouldn't hear Kevin. But depending on who you ask, that might actually be a good thing.
Hello? Can you hear me?
The opinions expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
Okay, here we go on this Sunday evening, January 31st, 2021. This is episode 34, version 2 of the Anime Roundtable, version 2. Good evening from 6 Points, 10 minutes south of Anime North, in the western tip of Toronto. Mike Nicolas, joined as usual by James Austin, Kevin Ng, Mohamed Sharmarke, and Geoff Greig. And we're going 5 again around the table, and we're doing this on consecutive weeks. If you like any of what you're hearing, holler if you hear me. AnimeRoundtable@gmail.com is our email address. Twitter and Instagram @AnimeRoundtable, AnimeRoundtable.com for show notes and past episodes. And we'll just mention the Discord, Twitch, and YouTube channels, since they actually do exist, even though there's nothing in them. But try and subscribe to them, and you'll get notifications when something finally shows up there. And please don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever. And if you could, give us a good review while you're there. Although, we have some explaining to do tonight. That intro doesn't have the same punch that it did last night, does it?
We can bring it up again.
Well, yes. Well,
I have a very interesting question, Mike. How can you do the first part in the future? Is it possible?
It is now.
Well, with good editing, sure.
And let's not forget, guys. Joe Biden's president now, so anything's possible.
Yeah, I think Kevin.
Are you saying the Raptors can win a game?
I mean, not
they're up right now.
We're bringing this discussion to the moon, just like GameStop.
Oh yes. Well, okay. First of all,
I've heard everyone's winning on GameStop, AMC, and BlackBerry.
I'm not.
And
I don't have any positions in them, so I'm not.
And silver, for that matter.
Oh man, the rally on silver is amazing.
Okay, let's backtrack because we kind of have to explain what happened and why this is being referred to as version 2 of episode 34 now. Well, the whole series is version 2 as well, but this particular episode is being redone. So earlier this week, I got an email from Zencastr. We taped this show on a free version of Zencastr. And if you're in any way of a podcaster, you know of various services that can record and keep online and etc. Put them together and you can just download off their website. Like there's various recording services now, since the podcasting phenomenon has evolved over the 15 some odd years the concept has been around. So we use Zencastr right now. And for now, we're using a free version. So we can record through their website. And then when I'm ready, I could come back and download the individual voice tracks of each of our participants, myself and the others, individually. And then that's how I stitch it together to make the episodes you're hearing. Earlier this week, I was given an offer to try the beta version of an updated version of Zencastr, which will incorporate webcams. And I took it in and we decided to try it with the intention maybe we could stitch together a YouTube version of the podcast. And for reference, Zencastr also has some pretty extensive editing suites, but really you have to subscribe to that. Everything has a cost, right? But I can download the RAWs, and if I have the proper software, I can work on both the movies and the audio. I have GarageBand, but I don't have Final Cut Pro on my Mac here. So the James and I took it for a test run, and we realized pretty quickly that we're not going to put out a video version of this podcast anytime soon. But we have made reference to it, and you'll hear a reference of a possible video version throughout this episode. But we'll fast forward now to Saturday, and we taped the episode again in the beta version of the new Zencastr, and we thought it was going fine. Then we finished the first part, and one thing that happens after we finish each segment is our voices are then processed and then put onto the server, onto Zencastr's server for me, once again, to be able to download down.
But not mine.
Well, yeah, and that's where it got complicated. Each of the individual participants can also download their voice file in case something happens, and then I can arrange for it to be sent over. But that wasn't an option with Kevin's voice. So, well, we couldn't hear Kevin. Or if I was to put this up right now, you wouldn't be able to hear anything Kevin said, because we don't have any of Kevin's voice file from last night, from that
It
first
doesn't,
segment.
because the beta version does not work on mobile at this moment.
And yeah, and
my phone.
yes, and disclosure, Kevin has been participating in the pandemic series episodes mainly through his phone. And yes, the beta probably isn't optimized to properly deal with using Android at this point, or probably any phone for that matter. And it might have been said so and said as much in the notes, but nonetheless, we are still attempting to recover that file, and we have contacted Zencastr's support, but we're not holding our breath. So we just decided to retape what would have been the first segment right now. So to the listeners out there who are going to be hearing this, here we'll give you the rundown. We are taping this first segment of episode 34 right now on Sunday evening, January 31st. The second segment, which we'll allude to throughout this part of the taping, the second segment was taped last night, Saturday evening, January 30th. And we're not running away from the technical difficulties. If you know the history of this podcast, you know we acknowledge whenever shit happens. And it just becomes part of the regular banter and maybe part of the regular legend of this show. Mind you, this show is a legend only in my own mind. But we've always acknowledged whenever these things have happened. And really, this is the first major one that I could really think of.
We're all about radical transparency here.
Sorry?
We're all about radical transparency here.
Yeah, we're all for it. I mean, heavens knows we don't get it in a lot of other aspects in our lives.
Or
If you release the episode in a couple days, you can call it the Groundhog's Day special.
Oh yes, that's right.
That's what I was thinking.
It's likely to come out.
Movie.
That's right. That's actually a good theme because ironically, this episode will probably find itself online on either February 1st or February 2nd. So it might be perfect, actually.
Gonna be
Just in
like
time
Bill
for
Murray
Groundhog.
driving a groundhog off a cliff.
Yeah. So yeah, ironically, this might be a Groundhog's Day episode. That might actually work.
Either that or Zencaster, the beta is censoring the mobile users, right?
Oh boy.
Kevin's
Well,
been too hot for the internet.
well, that's the explanation, and well, as I said, the other thing is we can't really run away from the glitch even if we wanted to because we refer to that same glitch throughout the second segment. And you'll hear us talk about that. But in any event, we're more or less going to try and talk about the same main topics we talked about when we taped this last night. So bear with us as best you could. Although I think we're going to skip the GameStop talk tonight. Mo.
Really? But it was so fun.
Okay, what do you want to say about it? Because that's obviously the big news this
Get
week.
in now, guys. Get in now. It's going to the moon. Get in now.
Okay,
I would
those
suggest you consult a financial expert and
Yes,
probably do
that
your
too.
research.
That too.
those who don't have lots of disposable income,
Nope. Don't worry about it, guys. Just sell your houses. Get in it right now, man. You need all the money in the market right now, guys. Come on.
don't listen to Mohamed if you don't have money that you can afford to lose.
It's okay, guys. Your parents probably own a house. Just take a second mortgage. You guys got this.
Oh my
To the moon.
If you're really going to jump in, you need to have your exit strategy in place. You need to know when you're going to sell, whether you're up or down.
Don't worry, guys. I'll never go down.
Kevin's speaking like somebody who works at a bank, and I think he does.
Mo, should I listen to
Speak
Elon
like an
Musk?
autist
Give
from Wall
me
Street.
the goods? Yes, okay.
And I hope no one, and that's not to insult any people with autism, but that's how some people in Wall Street Bets are being referred to as.
As what?
Some people will call themselves autists on Wall Street Bets.
Okay.
Well, that community has been questionable, to say the least, too, from what we've heard. So,
Well, we've heard different versions and different takes about the whole GameStop rally, the Reddit rally, I think it's being called, or the Reddit revolution. For that
and
matter.
that's why we talked about it. I think before that kind of tied into what we've talked about before with Matt Alt's book, The Final Chapter, Pure Invention, and other online communities and stuff like that, and how they can affect the real world.
Well, yeah, this is very 4chan and 2chan-ish, so to speak. Like Reddit's become like another version of it in its own way. And I know we talked about those boards being the home of various pranks, although obviously it could devolve and you can end up with something a little bit more, well, divisive, so to speak. But, we've kind of gone on about that in the past as well.
And even though we've heard things about it being for Joe Schmo, as many have said, likely the people who made the most money are probably the Goliaths. So all it was, as one headline had said this week, it was Goliath versus Goliath, with David being the fig leaf.
Yeah, that's the other thing. There's this belief that it could have been just hedge funds really squaring off against each other with retail traders, the small guys acting as proxies for one side, right? That's been a common belief in it all. And I'm talking as somebody who's just like I'm starting to learn a little bit about investing and trading on stock markets, but like Kevin hinted, I've only put up as much as I was willing to lose in that scenario. So, which right now, as somebody who's not presently working in the pandemic, isn't the greatest amount. But the only way I was going to learn anything was to put a little bit of stuff at risk, and that's what I've done. And I will tell you this much: I think the major indices at the close of Friday, whether it's the NASDAQ or the Dow Jones or the TSX here in Toronto, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. I heard that they were down 2% for the day, right? The trading account that I opened up earlier in the week dipped by that much. I looked at my bank statements and my other long-term savings. They're down 2% as well. And I think much of it, or many of those analysts said it was probably because many of those short sellers, many of those hedge funds, feeling the short squeeze as they like to call it, who got burned on shorting GameStop, had to sell off a handful of their other assets to be able to cover their losses. Hence, why the rest of the broader market got hit on Friday.
Yep.
Now's a good time to buy whatever blue chip stocks or ETFs that you were already putting money in because they're on sale right now.
You might be able to pick up a couple shares.
But yeah, Reddit, they did what they want, but of course, if certain people caught on quick when it was lower, they probably made their buck and are out of there for GameStop, AMC, BlackBerry, and any others they tried to create into a meme stock. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future because obviously the SEC and others are probably going to be on the lookout, right? As
The
the
really
world continues to
people,
evolve, right?
the really smart people, the ones who bought early, if they were smart, they would have already sold their initial buy and some profit on top and just ride on with the rest of their earnings and just see where it goes. Some people have done that.
I'd say a good portion, the smart money is gone and stuff like that. And there was one nice person I heard that was supposedly in Texas. He took his earnings that he had made off of that and supposedly bought all these switches to donate to a children's hospital in Texas.
Hey,
Yep.
That's nice.
I saw the same thing as well.
There's
A lot of
another. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mohammed.
I was gonna say a lot of people are donating their profits on this, man. I mean, that's why you gotta ride it to the moon, guys. Just get it now.
There was one person who works for a hospital. He got permission to have two patients have their life-saving heart surgeries paid for pro bono, have all the work done pro bono. And there's another guy who's using his proceeds to pay for his sister's Lyme disease treatment. So there is some good coming out of this, for sure.
It's
yeah,
always good to hear the
and then on
positive,
the
right? It's not all
and then
negative.
on the other end of the spectrum, you see this tweet from a youngster saying, "I've dumped my father's entire life savings into this,"
Oh
and
God.
he doesn't
Sounds
know
like a smart
about
man.
it.
You
Well,
know what that makes me think of? That one guy that put a good portion of his money into Bitcoin and then he forgot his password, and so he
yeah,
has all this
that's
money
another
and he can't get
one.
it.
He's searching for
Oh.
that, and he's searching for. I think he's going to try and search a dump for the password because he said it was on a hard drive he threw away. The other one, the other more heartwarming version story I heard is I heard a woman gifted a few shares. I don't know how many. I think it was like a
Oh,
50
it's her
shares
kid, yeah, or nephew or
kid
something. Yeah,
for
yeah.
the holidays for Kwanzaa.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was like 60 shares or something. No, sorry. It was $60 worth of shares. And then now it's like $3,000 worth of shares because, yeah.
assuming he's cashed out. But
I mean,
Yeah.
hey, he shouldn't. He shredded to the moon. Everyone, ride this shit to the moon. Come on, guys.
do it, right?
I
Anyway,
wish you good luck, Mohammed.
yeah, wish you, yeah. And, well, hey,
I
as I
hate
said,
to tell you, Mohammed's dream coach is probably guiding him to the moon, right? He's
I'm
not going to
telling you,
lose
man, I'm on a one-way trip to like that place up there where the rich people live.
on your private jet.
Absolutely.
absolutely. Actually, one other thing that also fixed up from last night is Mohammed didn't properly turn on his microphone, so when he was talking in that original version of the first segment, we only heard him through the camera on his webcam.
Yeah, guys.
So
I mean, when they say beta, they really mean beta.
yeah, it was just yeah. Anyway,
So, what was our first segment about, Mike? Do you remember?
yes, well, it was something you did, James. And I guess it's a good tie-in because this whole segment is about the business of anime too. James texted us an interesting article earlier this week from the Project Anime website. In it, a handful of industry analysts make their predictions for the anime and manga industry for the rest of 2021. Now, this podcast has always taken a fascination in the business of animes, so of course this article was something we would easily sink our teeth into. Now, as a quick aside, Project Anime is run by the Society for the Promotion of Japanese Animation, the parent group of Anime Expo. The site is a mainly industry-related site, but the tie with AX makes sense considering the commercial nature of that convention. So let's talk about some of the takeaways that caught our attention in the article. And the analysts who were asked to look in their crystal ball were actually some familiar names to us and maybe to a good chunk of anime fandom as well. Christopher McDonald, the head of Anime News Network, an old friend of ours, and once again, I speak as a former ANN columnist. Kristen McLean from NPD Books and NPD Bookscan. Roland Keltz probably doesn't need too much of an introduction. Journalist and scholar, longtime commentator on anime and manga. Kwok Y. Hansen from Anime Trending. I don't know what type of business that's into.
That's a website. It's animetrending.com,
Okay.
and he's the editor-in-chief.
And John McCallum from Interpret. Much the same thing, an
Sounds
industry
like it.
website.
Yeah, it's called Interpret Research. That's what it's called.
Okay. And they all had their different takes on what could happen in the rest of 2021. And we're going to pull out the ones that caught our attention and talk about it. And we'll go in order by which each of them spoke. So Christopher McDonald from ANN. And his thoughts seem to center on Sony themselves. How will Sony handle the fourth pillar in light of their acquisition of Crunchyroll and what have you? And well, first of all, he expected his expectations would be that Funimation, Crunchyroll, and Aniplex, which are of course the key brands within said fourth pillar, he expects them to continue to exist independently. But he expected Funimation and Crunchyroll to start to work together behind the scenes, which is almost business as usual considering the past relationship between Funimation and Crunchyroll and their collaborations. Although there had been reports of some disagreements behind the scenes.
Different corporate cultures, I guess, as they say.
Yeah, different corporate cultures. That's probably a good way to put it. And then, of course, how Aniplex could end up mixing in all of this.
And I think we've already seen that to a degree already with Funimation because Aniplex has been streaming basically their shows exclusively on Funimation. They've gotten Funimation to do dubs for their recent season of shows over the past couple of seasons. And also, we've seen they are still doing Aniplex releases, but the only one that we've seen that a regular releases come out is Demon Slayer, and that one had the regular expensive Aniplex release, and then recently they had two halves released by Funimation at the normal price. But it'll be
Okay.
remain to be seen if that continues in the future.
I sure hope so.
But I'm sure maybe Crunchyroll, if they're brought into the Funimation group, maybe they'll be able to stream Aniplex shows again as well and stuff like that day and date. So that would be the only thing I can think of. But overall, it's like we said, it's probably going to be business as usual, and it'll be a long time before the dust settles. Probably not 2021, but 2022. Maybe we'll see something.
Yeah, I was about to ask. There's a certain inevitability that we could see Funimation and Crunchyroll completely merge their streaming operations. I just don't see the two coexisting too long.
And depending on the region, they might go with Crunchyroll. or in North America, they might go Funimation, depending on
Yeah,
how they
that's a
feel.
debate. That's a debate. That's another debate altogether. I think a lot of people hope the Crunchyroll name is the one that exists on the streaming platform anyway.
Kind of dumb if it didn't, right? I mean, when you think anime streaming, you think Crunchyroll. You don't think like
You
Funimation.
don't think Funimation. You think of Funimation more as as a physical publisher,
Exactly.
But
right?
at some point, they know that physical publishing is going to diminish and stuff like that, even though that's been their bread and butter. So
Well,
they're playing for the future too, of course.
yeah, and that's going to be an interesting dilemma because Funimation is the more historic name when it comes to the anime industry in North America, but Crunchyroll is, as Mohamed said, the more identifiable name when it comes to anime streaming. Funimation's an older name. Funimation's an older brand. Funimation is the Dragon Ball company, right?
Yes, the
And
Dragon Ball.
and and because of that, I think it does have some, out of the niche, like not appeal, but awareness. Like people who saw or have watched Dragon Ball would have seen the word Funimation. If you went to see the Frieza or Brawly movie in the theaters, you would have had all the Funimation branding and logos. But I'm not sure if that sort of thing happens with Crunchyroll. I don't know if there's been any Crunchyroll movies. I don't imagine so.
Yeah, actually, that leads to his other point, which is the originals, the original branding. Like Netflix has Netflix originals, and that branding has extended to animated shows, to anime. Obviously they have a successful line in terms of some live actions, Stranger Things. List a couple Netflix originals right now that have
House of Cards was pretty popular back in the day.
House of Cards,
Stranger
Orange is
Things.
the New Black.
Oh yeah, Orange. Yep, yep.
That
But
went
but
in its heyday.
I think in this particular case with Crunchyroll and Funimation, I feel like the smart move would be to immediately drop any Funimation streaming service and just transfer all those users over to Crunchyroll and just have one unified streaming platform. Like when Disney bought Fox, they didn't also set up a Fox streaming service. They set up Disney Plus, just put all the stuff there. I mean, that's how it should be. You shouldn't have two streaming services and try to manage that. Because sure, on paper your numbers might look great. Hey, we have all these customers and all our streaming services, but then in reality, sooner or later you're gonna have to bring that shit together. And then when you do, your numbers gonna go low. It's not gonna look good. Just do it now. Have one giant big rebrand and say Funimation's gone. Here's Crunchyroll. Hooray! And then that's it.
That's a fair point.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
as I said, yeah, we all think it'll happen next year, but
Time will tell. It's
sooner,
kind of funny how it
there is an
all.
argument to say sooner the better.
Yeah, especially during a pandemic. Do it now. Why didn't you do it last year?
I think they're still trying to go through the process of getting the sales finalized and
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
regulated and
think.
looked at.
I think
That's
that's
why
the
those
only
things
thing that
take time, and
Bureaucracy.
I say
I,
2022.
I think that could be the only thing that's holding it back. It's the
And
sale
even
is
to rubber stamp, it takes time,
mhm,
which
mhm.
it is.
Right. All right.
The
But
funny thing I'll tell you though is like we keep on talking about streaming and stuff like that. And remember, Crunchyroll, it's like, yeah, their beginnings as illegal streaming and stuff like that, and then becoming legit. And so that's where people kind of went and started off. And then it wasn't till late in the game that Funimation and then, of course, ADV Sentai with the Anime Network got into streaming because those two, remember, started on TV. They started with on demand and
Yep.
sometimes in some regions linear TV, which is kind of crazy to think, right?
Dude, I remember the anime they had an on-demand channel. It was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean that's just the way evolution works in evolution. But like that's the way this process works, right? I mean, YouTube had a whole bunch of piracy stuff in the beginning, and look at it now, still has piracy stuff.
well, YouTube's an interesting case because, well, we'll talk about. I think we'll make a reference to it towards the end of the segment. Okay, a thought on Crunchyroll originals because Netflix has been good with their originals, whether it's animated or live action. Crunchyroll, not so much in many people's eyes. So
That's
would that
that's
interesting
continue?
interesting.
because
Sorry?
that's interesting because as we have talked about before, we talked about Netflix and how they've been promoting that their originals have been successful, right? And we've talked about watching some of their originals like Great Pretender and stuff like that and saying, do they get the people? But obviously, if they feel it's successful, they're getting enough people. But Crunchyroll, we haven't really been hearing that. And the only one I've watched is Inspector, and I know they've been getting a few others, but supposedly it sounds like it hasn't performed up to their expectations. And now that they're bought by Sony and Funimation, it's like, will they let them continue? Probably seeing that Netflix has found traction, they probably will try to continue, but it'll be interesting to see how they try to shift gears to reach the success maybe Netflix has hit.
Well, the other thing is we're talking Sony, and they already have their own studios.
Hmm.
And I think there are Crunchyroll originals that are in development hell and have been since they were announced. So
Mhm.
I don't have the biggest confidence in their ability to follow through with things. Versus like Netflix, when they announce things, it might be a couple of years off, but it comes out, and as far as anime, it's usually subbed and dubbed option. It's either
Hmm.
released all at once or in a couple parts. It seems to be pretty effective.
Yeah, and they get it ready internationally.
I think it has to do with Netflix's structure as well. Usually, from what I've heard from a couple podcasts, like when it comes to these projects, they just let their teams do what they need to do.
Well, I think that's actually an interesting point. Netflix at this stage has a very international infrastructure. I'm not totally sure you can say that about Crunchyroll right now.
Like, who would have thought Baki the Grappler would be as popular as it is now?
Mhm.
With that being one example.
Right. But as
And
I said, the way they produce those things, they know they have a structure already in place to have it in their multiple zones at once, to release it in multiple parts of the world at the same time. Crunchyroll and maybe everything in the fourth pillar for Sony doesn't have that type of optimization that's in sync to be able to do that right now. And that doesn't mean they won't. It's just it's not there right now. Obviously, they have all the pieces to make it work. It's Sony after all. But like we have to wait for the sale to complete first of all.
some of
And
that'll be
yeah,
interesting to see. There's
but
another factor
I
too,
think
though.
that like I mean, Kevin, that's not a bad point. Maybe part of the failures of the originals is just the rollout.
Or finding the right partners, right?
I don't know. I haven't watched the original myself, but
Sometimes it's a matter of picking the right properties, but I think with Netflix, it's predominantly the execution.
mhm.
Because
Hmm.
just like with Baki, like who would have thought to bring Devilman back of all things, and then look how that became successful too. So sometimes it's the execution.
Mhm.
Yeah, finding the
Well,
right.
I said we're just trying to make sense of it.
I was just thinking the other thing is there are different experiences. Like I know the one I'm intrigued to find out about this year in 2021 is that one of the Crunchyroll originals they announced was a partnership between them and Adult Swim for an original anime called Fena Pirate Princess, and that's being done by Production IG. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out because Crunchyroll will stream, and then obviously on Toonami they're going to do a dub through that. So that's an experiment that they haven't done before, and maybe they thought they are trying a different track after seeing what they saw before.
Basically, one owner to the other, right?
Hmm.
In many
But that
respects.
one, of course, was
Mhm.
under old ownership because remember Warner Media
Mhm.
and stuff like that.
Well, as I
But it,
said, from one owner to the other, or from the outgoing owner to the incoming one.
But I guess live action was the last one, and we were talking about that on Netflix because we've seen traction with that for Japanese live action because it isn't secondary to anime anymore, as Christopher McDonald was saying. And I know you've talked about before, like with Midnight Diner and some other ones that are finding an audience.
Well, yeah, it's more of a case of they're not. I don't think there's going to be a dependency to try and appeal to the anime fans in the promotion of live action adaptations. I mean, I think it's a fair point because let's go down the list a little bit. How many people who have enjoyed the Marvel Cinematic Universe would have been into the comic books. I think that's becoming less and less as time has gone. Of course, there's a lot of people who are into the comic books who love the movies and will pick away at them as to what they should have put in from compared to the source material. But then there is a increasingly larger segment who really don't care.
There's also a lack of availability, though. Like graphic novel sales of superheroes are available in bookstores, but I think that's more of a failure on the comic book companies or the distribution methods or things like that.
Mhm.
I think there are ways that they could have done that, but it might be too late to make that kind of connection now.
Some
I
and also it doesn't help that in several of those cases you can't 100% say, oh, you enjoyed this movie, well, you need to go and watch this or read this one specific segment of this one specific like Spider-Man comic where this happens. And whereas with manga you can just go, hey, you watch Battle Angel Alita, here's the comic, here you go.
Yeah. You don't
well,
have
that's
to
part.
go like
Well,
volume 3 of The Flash from 1975 to 1986. You want the run that lasts
Exactly.
from issue 22 to 75. Like there's such a harder sell and a harder entry point to that world. And I love Western comics, but if it doesn't work the same way as far as the source material. With manga, it's such an easy, as Kevin mentioned, it's such an easy, you know, movie. Here's the book. Show. Here's the book. It's
the transition, right?
yeah.
But then
Yeah.
my thought was on the most casual of viewers. Would a casual viewer want to pursue that even further? Although I guess part of the thinking is and part of the motivation of companies and would be to move people away from being casual and a little bit more diehard and a little bit more curious about the materials because maybe they have a stake in their interest in that.
I think it'll work a lot better in this sort of realm, but I also worry a little bit about the level of adaptation and how much it will be different, and if people will start complaining, like if the anime and the live action of Way of the House Husband ends up being pretty much one to one, are people going to get tired of it, by the time they, get to the manga or get to the live action if it's beat for beat, shot for shot? I have no doubt that both the animation and the live action are I'm pretty sure they're going to be popular, but I'm a little bit worried at this point with some of these series being too close to the source material.
Oh, but sometimes isn't. But we've had this discussion before. Sometimes that's the beauty of different adaptations. You can see what the creator or the driver behind each of them thought mattered when it
And I
compared to
feel
Yeah.
the
like
first.
a good example would be Monster, of course, because it's
Yeah.
basically shot for shot what happened in the manga, but it just brings what was on the page before that we read to life. But
And
that doesn't always happen as we've seen. So.
and that's not always
Usually,
interesting.
I usually hear people wanting shot for shot, whereas I don't hear, oh, I don't mind a different adaptation nearly as often
Mhm.
from personal experience. I'm
Well, yeah.
indifferent.
No, well. As I said, I just take fascination in them, and regardless, because as I said, I like to see what the different interpretations are. And that all said, there have been cases where the live action was considered the better or or at the very least the more popular adaptation.
Go
And
then.
throughout the last 20 years, we've had in terms at least on the Japanese side, we've had cases where the live action probably was way more popular than the anime version. When
GTO comes to mind here.
GTO is a big one. GTO comes to mind, Goku-sen to some degree, although its star now her name escapes me for a second because the star of Goku-sen, the Japanese star of Goku-sen, and I'm going to look this up right now, was also the star of the live action version of Hanayori Dango.
Oh, yeah, that's
Look
another
it up.
good example.
But that but the thing is, sometimes it's star power as well, right? Because the main star, one of the main stars of Hanayori Dango was Jun Matsumoto of Arashi. And I know we refer to another Jun Matsumoto later on. but that's for the listeners to eventually hear about.
Nodame Cantabile is another example
Mm-hmm.
of that.
And the actress's name was Yukie Nakama. Wait a second. Was she in Hanayori Dango? I may actually stand corrected. So no, she wasn't the star of Hanayori Dango. So I do stand corrected on that one. But Yukie Nakama was the star of Goku-sen, and I will look up who played her in the live action. Mao Inui. Okay, Mao Inui was the star of Hanayori Dango. And just for reference, there's always an ongoing rumor. I don't know if it's been confirmed that she has been long linked to Jun Matsumoto himself since as far back as the Hanayori Dango television series. Anyway, but yeah, we can go. My point being, they know how to make a live action really powerful in terms of in the mind's eye. And coming back to North America, we have trouble thinking about Iron Man without thinking about Robert Downey Jr. anymore. I think we've come to that point. And I'd say Batman too, but how many people have played Batman and we all thought they were either really bad, good, or really bad?
I mean, there's
Christian
only
Bale.
one Batman. Everyone knows that, right?
Yeah, who? Christian Bale?
Adam
Come on,
West.
man. George Clooney. Everyone knows George Clooney's the best Batman.
But no Val
I
Kilmer?
was
You'll
Val
look for Michael
Kilmer. I
Keaton?
thought it was Val Kilmer.
Kilmer's a tight second.
No love for Michael Keaton? None?
Michael who? You mean the Vulture?
Yeah, okay, cool. All right.
He's the
Anyway,
only one who's gonna play Batman twice. I mean, in two different, I guess,
Don't
eras.
worry, don't worry. Ben Affleck's gonna come back and he's gonna do it again.
But with the
Okay.
hunger for content, it'll be interesting to see in the live action sector with growth in that, to see the originals that might come out that
Mhm.
from Japan that aren't based off any manga or anime and stuff like that, because that'll
Right.
be a nice change of pace, right? It's always nice to see different things.
Right. Okay, let's continue then, because we're like 40 some odd minutes into this segment already, and we
Uh-oh.
haven't gotten to the others. We are going 2 hours, I think, when it's all said and done. Kristen McLean, manga trends will continue their growth in 2021.
And that was an interesting one because I know we had talked earlier in the year and stuff like that, and one of them related to a manga roundtable that was done at the virtual Comic Con, San Diego Comic Con. And they had talked in the Viz representative, I know, had talked about when COVID started happening in March, there was a worry about sales and what was going to happen. And then somehow all the sales went up across the board for a lot of publishers and stuff like that. So they had to revise their expectations. And as we've seen, they talked about the manga being the largest part of the graphic novel category for traditional US trade graphic novels at 43% in 2020. But the thing you remember too with NDP Books and NDP Bookscan is they only look at a certain part of the market. So they're looking at the bookstores and stuff like that. They don't get all the digital numbers, I don't think. And remember, they don't look at comic book stores as well. So that leads you to wonder how much bigger it is and stuff like that, especially since people are hungry for something, whether it's watching something on streaming or reading something either physically or on their Kindle, for example.
So these numbers may not tell the whole story, and they may actually be better.
Could be.
Okay. Well, there's a bright side to the pandemic, I suppose.
This manga trend has been going for at least a couple of years now, though, because in similar articles in the past, it's been noted that when it comes to graphic novel sales, the two biggest categories tend to be children's graphic novels, so stuff like Reina Tagelmare, for example, and manga. It's
Mm-hmm.
and it helps that it helps that when you have a hit anime come out, it will almost always boost sales of the manga in return.
And they had talked about that too, about how basically the streaming these animes and stuff like that helps juice their sales, basically, so to speak. And we've seen that with some we've talked about before. I know with Demon Slayer, of course.
Well, yeah, and I guess that once again it comes back down to what we mentioned just now about okay, what will the curiosity be for source material for the original materials?
It's happening right now with Jujutsu Kaisen as well, one of the newer Shonen Jump titles, which I don't think is that great, but its popularity is undeniable right now, and it helps that when you have a good studio animating a show, that's when you really see good results.
That's where we are. Okay, we should start to go through the other three now. Okay, Rolling Celts, three interesting points. VTubers. Okay, I'm still. I guess this. I'm showing my age again, and not totally grasping the popularity of a virtual.
And that's it's and it's just started to come around because I know we've talked about it, probably not in past episodes exactly, but in private, I know about YouTube even saying the tail end of 2020 that more people are apt to watch a virtual persona of a person than an actual person in a stream, and that we've now seen like the Japanese side, people are watching those VTubers and they're getting deals. I know one VTuber has their own brand of sake being made in Japan, and then
And another,
they have actual English VTubers starting to make a presence and stuff like that, being signed and streaming around the world. So people are definitely grasping for something to look at. And the one interesting thing in that is, I guess we kind of maybe could have seen that coming in a way because we've had Hatsune Miku
yeah, I was
before, and that we've
about.
seen the shows in Europe and North America. And as you said, Mike, we've mentioned it before, being on Letterman and stuff like that. So it's not like we had maybe should have seen this coming a bit.
Yeah, I think it's just because for me personally, I'd finally not necessarily come to terms, but just gotten used to the idea of the virtual idol. And remember, this is a concept that's gone as far back to me, my memory of it. The concept has gone as far back as Macross Plus because that was used as a plot device.
Yeah, there's an increasing amount of like idol shows, live action and like, well, not live action, but real life idols and like stuff in fictional properties like Love Live, for example. And it's like all these different forms are just combining now. And I also look at K-pop as another example where like those performers are pretty much idols, but they're expected to do it all, and they do.
I think
Well,
there's a bigger discussion here about kind of the separation of like the idol or the personality from a real person. Like I think, if you look at even in the video game YouTuber space, you have Arlo, who's not virtual, but he's a Muppet or a Muppet style puppet, who's relatively popular. But no one really is, thinking about the real person behind that, although I don't know who that would be because he is a literal monster guy. So, but that's what people say. But for the virtual idols, I'm curious, like, if is it a privacy thing? Is it this back to fantasy escapism? But yeah, I think that's probably a larger discussion. I'm just really curious about all the factors that are driving this trend.
And some of them are being done through agencies. And I remember one of the English ones, they were on a YouTube podcast, Trash Taste. And when they were on the video portion, it was their virtual avatar that was in the sea, which is kind of interesting. But the other thing, though, too, is we can look at from our thing, and it's like you never know where these things can go. And I wouldn't count it out, because we saw what happened in the video game space just as Twitch and others were getting going. And some of the companies were like, no one's going to watch someone playing a video game and stuff like that and all that. And look where we are now. It's like, it's not just about personalities. You never know what people will start to watch, or how their taste will change and how they take in content.
Well, I guess the last part about I want to acknowledge concerning the VTubers, a VTuber, a voice behind a popular VTuber recently passed away. I remember reading about that, and that kind of made news. But also, like, I've seen the odd time I've gone on Twitch. You see a avatar talking in the front of somebody playing video games. So it's not, in one sense, it's not far fetched, but I guess I'm just curious. As I said, I'll just have to watch a little more to be able to understand it. So in one sense, it doesn't surprise me, but in the other sense, I'm still trying to grasp it because I'm still grasping how we got to this point. Okay, streaming anime comes of age. That's another point from Celts that caught my attention. Anime now a cornerstone of global streaming media platforms. So Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, YouTube, HBO Max, they put up anime, right? Sony, of course, we know that we've already talked about that. So more
And
anime-inspired co-productions, you would say, bigger budgets, more CG. Just it's just a thing now.
or partnering with Japan, as we said, these co-productions of anime inspired, and we've seen that people are willing to look at animation as a medium. We've seen Spider-Verse do very well and stuff like that. So hopefully that's good things for the future to see what comes of that.
Well, it's when we taped this last night, I know Geoff brought up a point about somebody who.
Oh yeah, so Lasan Thomas, who's known for a lot of things, I think he's developing the Yasuke animation or anime. I guess it would be an anime coming up, but there's I'm sure some people unfortunately would question if it counts as an anime with a African American developer, but he has the series Cannon Buster on Netflix, which has a lot of that African American hip hop, at least the musical culture embedded in it, even though it's a relatively like it's a fantasy kind of mech adventure anime. And it's not that it's took the world by storm or anything, but it's a pretty cool story about a series that was successful on Kickstarter as far as the pilot, and then Netflix picked it up for a season. And I think that, or at least I'd like to hope that we're going to see more of these sorts of things that break that divide of that will have people question like what is anime or who can make anime. A lot of people would say that things like the Castlevania series count as anime, even though that's probably more just stylistically inspired, by Japanese animation. But yeah, I think that there is a whole lot of potential here, but I think it is still a little early to say how much of this will continue to snowball and ramp up.
And it'll be content creators basically collaborating together, because Castlevania was a great collaboration between some Western writing, of course, Konami for the Japanese original video game, and then all that coming together. And it wasn't like they were doing one to one for the video game. It was about creating that universe and creating those characters, and it made it successful. And ironically enough, Viz is the one doing the physical release, so it kind of comes all full circle in a way sometimes.
But it's giving, like, I mean, to be a little bit more on the utopian side and to spout some of the benefits of where we are at this point in time. You can make that argument that that type of stuff may not have had a place in in a bygone era.
Yeah, absolutely not. Like, I don't think any Japanese network would have, decided to like, yeah, let's give an anime made by a black man a shot. Like, I know that sounds harsh, but I don't think they would have had the confidence. I mean, most of the cast is dark skinned. It's, probably wouldn't be necessarily appealing to a lot of the major fan base there, at least at the time, they wouldn't have been the confidence. So I think that, this whole Netflix, Patreon, independent sort of focused market or production style, it will produce a lot more variety. I don't think that a lot of that variety will have a whole lot of staying power, but I think it's wonderful that they're going to be on Netflix, which is arguably in this day and age a bigger deal than being on broadcast television, at least in the West.
Yeah, well, which led to a thought that I gave last time, and I'll give it again. With material back then, any fringe material, I guess what would have been considered fringe back then, would have had a bunch of different problems finding its way onto traditional broadcast media. And it isn't just necessarily because of, like any discrimination, but sometimes it's also being able to flesh out your narratives. And work with me on this one, because as time has gone, like in traditional media, you are hampered by various things. And probably one thing that would come to my mind is time. In television, you have to tell your narrative in a 30-minute or 1 hour time frame. You can't flesh out your media. This is the beauty of digital platforms these days, which kind of started with podcasting too. But obviously, as also we have that now in streaming services, and what those are able to hold. You aren't constricted by certain procedures of time of what traditional media would have given you. Like as I said, TV, you have many more constraints. Radio, not as much. You might be able to flesh out a discussion, a narrative a little bit better, but not much more, because in the end, you are still constricted by the bottom of the hour or the top of the hour. But podcasting, YouTube, Netflix, you can tell your story. You have a little bit more time. You have a little bit more leeway to be able to tell your story. And, even if you look at the lengths of some individual episodes of certain shows on streaming, a lot of the times you will see varying times for episodes of a show. It happens a little bit more often not.
Especially with like original streaming content. I know WandaVision is supposed to be half hour. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Same thing with
Mhm.
all the original Netflix stuff. I mean, House of Cards sometimes had episode long hour long episodes. They're slightly less, slightly more. Game of Thrones did the same thing where they extended their episodes from time to time. It's
Mandalorian as well, like the other platforms do it as well.
exactly.
And I was thinking Terrace House back then. Sometimes they're 25 minutes, sometimes they're 45 minutes. And us here on podcasting as well. Here we are going on an hour in this segment. We can go 2 or 3. May not be the greatest listening for our listeners out there. I don't know. You tell us. animeroundtable@gmail.com. But we can have episodes of varying content from 1 hour to 2 hours to 3 hours back in the day. And on top of that, and we can go I'll even take this thought even one further. Streamers are looking for content with all this competition. You have your Hulus, you have your Disney Plus stars, you have your Netflixes who are always looking for on the lookout for something they can put on. And because of the narrow casting nature of these services, because of the narrow casting nature of digital platforms in general, that audience would who would find like a specific show appealing, it's a little, for some strange reason, it might be, or not, maybe not some strange reason, finding something that a show that would match their tastes, it becomes easier for them to find. They're more the that audience who would be more in tune to hearing those narratives in full could be easier to find in all of this. Like it's messy. It's messy in one way, but there's something for everybody in the going the other way. Maybe that's what maybe that's where anime. That's why anime has a thing because they know that audience is out there. Okay, we move on. We move on.
Sounds good.
Yes, I would say yes.
Okay, Kwok Hansen only had 1 point from anime trending, and he makes the prediction of a new possible player, and it's we were on this topic of Goliath versus Goliath earlier when talking about GameStop. He thinks Disney will have something to say in the near future.
It's a possibility.
Well, it's
Talking Disney
strange.
Plus. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it's strange because, in the outset of the announcement that Sony owns everything in terms of anime streaming distribution in the world, here we are, worried about the monopoly, hoping for another player in the anime streaming game, or at least in terms of anime on streaming services. Could it be Amazon? Could Warner Brothers want to come back or Warner Media want to come back in some form? I even put out Rakuten with Vicky just as a thought. But why not the biggest of them all, Disney? Disney having an interest in anime production, anime style.
And
How
he
odd.
They've dabbled with it in the past with a few Marvel adaptations. Marvel Discourse, I think, most recently. They've had the Stitch anime. So I could see them continuing to sort of dabble in it like that when it comes to their own properties. I'm not sure if they'd be in the market to produce originals though.
I think that's the key point.
Yeah.
And they mentioned it in the thing there where they said Disney is going to do 10 animated Star Wars films by Japanese anime creators in 2021, and that'll probably be similar to the Animatrix or something like that. So,
So something in the universe of,
mhm. And
right?
they talk about Disney's relationship with anime. I know in his discourse on this, and one of it is talking about Studio Ghibli and stuff like that. But from what we saw of that, it was kind of like it didn't really go as well. So in this case, I would say it's more maybe taking their own properties and maybe going to Japan to maybe using something Japanese infused or anime infused. You know what I mean?
Yeah, as I said, the last line's a pure invention in many respects.
Why would you say it didn't do as well for them?
It's weird because the animators and even Pixar and they greatly respect Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki, but it was kind of felt like the business side, from what we heard, just wasn't able to get the most out of Ghibli. Like their releases and that just didn't feel. It felt like they were just doing a contract. Like, okay, we have this contract, we just got to get these things out or whatever. It wasn't a celebration like G Kids is doing, getting them into theaters, growing the community, and saying these are films worth watching. You know what I mean?
I guess I do see the sentiment there, although I do imagine that those DVD and Blu-ray releases must have done fine, at least for the AAA Ghibli titles. But yeah, I get what you're saying there.
Well, I mean, if they were really good, we wouldn't be talking about Ghibli's library being with G Kids now.
I feel like maybe they didn't care in the end. Yeah, it's like yeah, they fulfilled the contract and they just didn't feel compelled to continue. I don't know. Who knows?
Remember the last Ghibli film they released, and that was Miyazaki's Wind Rising. They didn't even put that through the Disney line. They did that through Touchstone.
Mm-hmm.
Disney could be interesting, and it could be the first step in Disney eventually buying out Sony, right, Mo?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's gonna happen, guys.
Yeah, back to your myriad of predictions.
Absolutely,
What's
bro.
the
It's gonna
Yeah.
happen.
So it'll
okay?
all be one universe, Mo?
believe
We'll
every
have
character
like a 5-hour movie with every character imaginable.
Considering everything Disney owns, they should really get on making a Bob's Burgers anime or a Muppets anime, something along those lines to really sort of shock people.
they're
They
doing
should
a
do a
Bob's
Muppets
Burger remake.
anything.
Well, I just love to see those character designs for that matter. Okay, John McCallum, interpret. He had a bunch of crystal ball like predictions, and like I like the first one. Anime production goes on despite the state of emergency. I like what he said. I like the thought because of how a lot of live action productions right now have its COVID issues. You don't seemingly that wouldn't be the case in terms of a cartoon or anime.
Well, it depends, right? Because as we said, we saw that in the summer 2020, the anime season saw a downturn. They only had about 25, and then many were delayed either to fall, and many of the fall, for example, were delayed to the winter because we have tons of premieres this season, but they've had a crazy amount. Like, as he said, upward of 50 new anime a season, but it looks like they're on the way back up. And some of these animes, remember, they start production well in advance. But if they've got their options like figured out and stuff like that with working from home and the flexibility to make the schedules work and stuff like that, and they start getting it down and can start getting closer to what they were doing before, maybe I think, as he said, it was like 30 to 40 series per season, then, as we said, many streaming services are hungry for content. And if they can offer that, then they may take them up on it because they're looking for eyeballs.
Mm-hmm. Anime proves a hard habit to kick. Well, do you want to say something about that, or should I just go to the other ones?
And I think that just went towards what we just talked about before, is that it may fill up, as he said, a void of unmet demand and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't know how live action, they're starting to ramp up again and stuff like that. But it's a question of, okay, are they going to have everything in place? Are the COVID restrictions going to restrict them from being on a normal timetable? And then the other question is, where do they want to show it? Because some feel confident they can still show it in a theater like James Bond, and we've seen how long that's been delayed. And then some of them have went like Warner, trying to get things on HBO Max and stuff like that. I think, what was it, the new King Kong Godzilla movie is the most recent one being talked about, coming, I believe, in March.
Remember, well, we've had our talk about that and how the structure is just more in tune for that.
Mm-hmm.
Anime fans will be seen as I think we kind of said this already, but anime fans will be seen as a market, not just a single segment. Kind of ties into a bunch of other points that were mentioned in this crystal ball prediction and probably in past episodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So U.S. streamers lean into the female market. Okay.
And that was when I think we talked about, because we've always seen it there. We've been at the conventions. We've seen the shoujo market in the early aughts, and then of course the yaoi market and all these other things. So they've always been there and stuff like that. It's just a matter of, I guess now they're like, okay, we now have to go after this market, or maybe diversify how they're reaching out to people, I guess, for more the mass market.
Yeah, no doubt about that. It's just that how will the old guard feel? I think that's part of it. And could we could we see a bit more of a Gamergate like attitude
I
at some
don't see
point going
any
forward?
issue with it.
I don't either, but
I don't think that you're the people that needs to be worried about.
I
Yeah,
think,
well, 'cause,
Jeff,
well, no, we
like,
shouldn't. I'd like to think not, but then Gamergate did happen.
Yeah, like what I mean
And
by that is that, like, I think, as far as the five of us here, I don't think we're the type of people who would have an issue. As it's kind of been made clear, it doesn't take a lot to rile that crowd up. Over the last couple weeks, there was a bit of discourse on social media about gatekeeping regarding girl and women anime fans. Like, it's not, you need a soft breeze to set these people off. But I think that it depends on I guess how much they seem like they're being attacked. Right now, I don't think that there's a lot of marketing to the mainstream when it comes to the girl and women market in anime. We haven't had a Sailor Moon or a Card Captors, although those were marketed toward boys in North America. But even from a teen and women market, we haven't had that mainstream breakout like we have had for shonen or the more adult action series.
Yeah, that's true. It's all like, I don't want to say fragmented, but it's all like there's a lot of different niches going on. Like you have your fans of, say, like shows like Supernatural, for example, which I think finally ended a little while ago. And you have this whole boom of like men shows where like you have just a bunch of really attractive men doing what they do, and those sell very well. I don't see as many traditional shoujo properties anymore, from what I can tell, at least on the manga front. Like, there are definitely fewer anime titles that are traditionally shoujo. Viz doesn't put as many new shoujo content as they used to. Definitely not as much as they did back in the 2000s. And even with Kodansha, for example, most of their shoujo titles go digital first, and they might see a print release. So it's interesting to see the shift, so to speak.
I think with like slice of life series, you had Carol and Tuesday, which is more of a slice of life, but I think because of the pedigree of the creator, it's I think the closest thing maybe we've had to a wide shoujo success. But I think, yeah, Kevin, I think you're right. I think that that sort of subgenre is very on the decline.
Though interesting enough, Yuri has been kind of on the upswing and stuff like that because that wasn't able to find a market in the aughts. And then over the past, I'd say 7 years, we've seen Viz, we've seen Seven Seas, we've seen Young Press, and we've seen animes in the past few years of Yuri being marketed front and center and stuff like that. So
Although Yuri's usually targeted to men, whereas it's BL that you'll see that targeted more towards women.
kind of interesting when you think about that because it's like,
That's a whole other discussion.
Right. Family-friendly features finally coming to anime streaming.
And that is in relation, I know we had talked about like Sony, of course, devouring Crunchyroll and all that stuff. And you look at Funimation and Crunchyroll, what they have for their platforms, and it's very different from, say, what you look at a mainstream Netflix or Amazon Prime and stuff like that. And I think they gave a shout out to High Dive because you have those parental controls. You have the thing where okay, I can watch my shows, but say if I have someone younger, all that other stuff, I'll be able to gatekeep and do stuff like that. Supposedly on High Dive, they've added those features, but they haven't really done that on Crunchyroll and Funimation. It looks like they're still in that niche mentality. Like they've put the content warnings when you open the episode, but realistically, what's that going to do? Is someone going to look at that and say, maybe I don't want to watch that if they're younger? No, they're going to continue to watch on.
I want to.
Makes them want to
I
watch
want to see
more.
the violence or whatever, right?
Want to
Well,
see
Yeah.
those movies, man.
how much under 13 content are even on a platform like Crunchyroll and Funimation? Like, I don't think your Doraemons are gonna end up there. I mean, they might be there, but I think you're mostly seeing sort of the shonen 15, 16 target age. Well, shonen's 12 plus, but you're seeing your kind of rated T for teen and above on these platforms anyway.
Mm-hmm.
What's to say? Well, and maybe that's the next part in what's to come.
And the other thing is, remember, they do have their free part of the service and stuff like that. So that's still in the equation and stuff like that. Let's not be foolish and think that they can't just go on and find their own things, of course.
Although I will say, James, like, them not having those parental controls on Crunchyroll doesn't surprise me because they've never been that good at updating their video players.
Yeah, well, who knows? Maybe that's part of what's to come as well, an improvement on actual streaming technology.
We'll see about
Until
that.
we see it, I'll believe it. But you would think if you want to compete with the big boys, then you gotta start acting like one. You know what I mean? And
Well, they
Yeah,
don't have
that's
competition, really. No
well,
competition
because
that
they're still
matters.
thinking as a niche, but if they're trying to compete against the others, right? But as we
we're
said,
talking
right?
we're talking about like Sony later on, right?
Hmm.
We're talking about what could happen to Crunchyroll,
Correct.
and there's a point to there later. Okay, one a word for Sentai Filmworks and High Dive. Less anime related mergers and acquisitions in 2021. What's there to acquire now with Sony owning everything? Well, maybe just buying Sony, right, Disney?
Hmm.
But McCallum left a word for Sentai, who
Yeah.
seems
It said
happy to
Sentai
be.
might seem like a likely target for M&A, but the Houston-based anime company seems to value its independent status, which makes it a rarity in North America. With the recent investments of upward of 30 million from Cool Japan Fund, it has a means of maintaining its independence for some time in a highly competitive niche market. Now, obviously, they're not going to be getting A titles, but at least they'll continue to go on. And we've talked about how they've been looking at some Netflix anime. They've looked at some Amazon anime and stuff like that because they want to get that out physically, of course. And they've looked at older titles. Like this past week, they licensed Nana
Mm-hmm.
from NTV. So that's good to see that they can still get that out. And they might look at some other back catalog and maybe some others from Nippon Television, which is the one that was licensing out Nana, that haven't been able to make their way out. People were talking about Berserk, the original series, 1997. Maybe Discotheque or them could take a look. And I know a lot of people talk about Monster, but I think
Monster.
we won't be seeing that because I think that's issue in and of itself, as many people say. It's a licensing nightmare.
As
Mm-hmm.
John Sorabella tweeted, he called John Ledford a fighter, and it just reminds me of how they're just keeping up the good fight. How
Yeah.
long remains to be seen, but I could see John not wanting to relinquish his company.
And I guess some of it is what happened with ADV because they had made that
Yeah,
thing, and then because the Japanese side pulled out, they kind of were
so did.
left with their pants down. They had to somehow reorganize in that shuffle that was kind of, to say the least, questionable to become Sentai and all these crazy companies. And now they're just all now Sentai. So I was like, huh? But now it's funny. They used to be the big dog, remember, back in the aughts, and now they're basically like Genion or Bandai was way back then, the
Yeah,
second
and
fiddle, so to speak.
it's a little sad because I'm wondering how many of the more recent fans would have known of a name like ADV.
None.
ADV is just a lost legacy now, which is a bit sad because you know.
Let's not
And
forget
then we
like
still,
Geneon too. Geneon was
They don't,
pretty good.
they don't got that
Yeah.
EVA money anymore.
Okay, last point. And familiar faces drive streaming reboot city apparently, right? Reboots, remakes, Bleach, Shaman King. I think we kind of hinted at this
Oh,
for
not
many,
that reboot. Okay,
other than well,
I'm
not
coming
that
from
reboot,
the
Yeah,
net.
not the reboot of reboots. No, no.
I've heard horrible things about that.
Okay.
the
Well,
live action reboot.
I just like the idea. I mean, this was an interesting point because we constantly talk about remakes and reboots, continuations of historic titles, and it isn't like Bleach, obviously, and Shaman King we've mentioned. Fruits Basket we've mentioned. Cardcaptor Sakura coming back a couple of years ago. Any other titles off the top? I
Sailor
mean,
Moon Crystal.
Baruto, yeah, Baruto,
Sailor Moon,
um,
yeah, like you said.
Yashahime, Sailor Moon. I mean, this is a trend of sorts, right? It's not necessarily unique to anime. Cobra Kai, we have, right? Ralph Macchio introducing his kids to when he was a teenager in Karate Kid, or Mario Lopez constantly joking around about his daughter watching old episodes of Saved by the Bell. This as the reboot of that came out a couple months ago. This is a thing again, right? And I guess maybe what this ends up doing is the circle of life of sorts, with the focus on these titles coming back out again. Curiosity on their original forms would be out there again, with the return of Bleach, continuing that storyline. So what about the original episodes? Shaman King, how does it compare? Fruits Basket, I'm sure there's curiosity about the original one.
And it also makes people probably go to look for the original source material, the manga versions of those again. And Shaman King, it's going to be re-released under Kodansha USA and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So it
As I said, if
raises
there's
all
enough,
sails, so to speak, because
yeah,
people will, once they get an interest, they'll become vivacious in finding all the other content to devour, whether it's the manga or going back to see what happened originally, if it did have an original series. And Shaman King would be an interesting look at, because remember, that was 4Kids that originally did that. They had Shaman King and One Piece, and we're going to make them just as big as Pokemon, but it didn't quite
oh
work
yeah,
out
I
that way.
And with the
mean,
They did.
manga,
mhm. But it's a case of making IPs evergreen, for better or worse. I mean, you
and
do have your Star Wars.
with the Shaman King manga, it's gonna be like they're gonna adapt the whole thing with the real ending, which we never got
Yeah,
when they put it out.
that's sort of it.
And with Shaman King, like the original anime did diverge, similar to Full Metal Alchemist. So it's going to be
Mhm.
interesting to see how that resonates, how that turns out, because it is a series that has a significant, small but significant fan base in the West, and not quite Saint Seiya big, but still fairly big in Mexico and Latin America as well. So I think a lot of these reboots are interesting because they are from the 2000s. So Inuyasha, Shaman King, Bleach, versus this sort of trend used to be more common if you look at things like I guess Cutie Honey or the long running series like Detective Conan and Pokemon. So I think it's interesting that it's happening now.
Maybe the whole concept is not that far fetched when you think about it. It's
It's
really just taking a long, long vacation.
Yeah, I think it's a bigger gap than
Nostalgia
I
is
guess there
strong.
used to be. Yeah.
Well, that's where we are sometimes. Nostalgia does go, and
That's the
then
power of
you know
nostalgia for you.
it's the power of nostalgia, and almost Rolling Stones like, hey, a parent can enjoy a show with their kid.
And they did it
I'm
in the
seeing
early
it in the
aughts.
manga side too, because
Mhm.
like with Fruits Basket specifically, like you have the new editions by Yen Press, but then I'm seeing lots of people specifically looking for the old Tokyo Pop release, which has gone out of print, and it'd be more expensive to acquire than buying the new release, which is
Nostalgia.
fascinating to me.
That's interesting to think about.
Yeah. I have them sitting on the shelf somewhere.
The interesting thing, though, I was thinking about, we were talking about nostalgia, but we have seen it before, even in the anime sector. The early aughts, it was Astro Boy, Cyborg 009, Gigantor under its original name and stuff like that. So things, as we said, are
Blackjack.
cyclical.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that's that. And as I said, this was an interesting article, and any one of these predictions were a segment in and of itself. And we've been talking for like an hour and a half now. We'll put up a link to the article itself and let everybody else who listens to this have their own debate about it. And of course, 1 month is down in 2021, 11 more to go. So we'll see how all this pans out. Maybe we can revisit it just to see how much of this happened. But isn't that the fascination with listening back to old episodes too of this show? Because we had our thoughts back then too.
Hmm.
That all said, well, that's pretty much it for anything we want to say about it. But let me make a quick recommendation before we throw to break. Earlier on Saturday, our friend Jesse Betteridge released the latest episode of his podcast, the Zen in Canada podcast, And they spared a couple minutes in the middle of the show to talk about their take on the acquisition, on Sony's acquisition of Crunchyroll. And they put up a couple of interesting questions that might be worth listening to hear them talk about. Mainly how it could play with Canadian regulators, because the government has been looking at changes to the Broadcasting Act, but specifically the targets seem to be streaming services.
It's that's gonna be very interesting, especially with the CR
CRTC.
yeah. I mean, like, I don't know how they're gonna, because it's like a lose-lose situation for them. They're not going to get, like, none of these streaming services are going to give them any meaningful information. They're not going to kowtow to any government regulations. I mean, Netflix is not going to be like
They may
putting
not have.
in more Canadian content because they're in Canada. That's not going to happen. That's not.
Well, as I said, hear their take. It's an interest. It's not a one you can dismiss, but it's an interesting. They take a different angle on it and worth listening to. And then the other one is Sony themselves, and maybe a point I've brought up in the past, and what they think could happen to Crunchyroll into the future. Just remember, Sony bought an anime streaming service, but they don't have a mainstream one of their own now. And they put the idea that that could be the future of Crunchyroll. It could be the home of all of Sony's other movie and television properties at some point.
Well, they did do Asian dramas at one point, remember?
So it's not far-fetched, and it's at least a debate. You can hear their take on it in the latest episode of Zan in Canada. We'll put a link up for that. Anyway, that's that. How do you think we did on the redo?
Longer?
Yes, it was longer, but we brought up different points, and some points I know based on what I listened to this morning didn't come up. But hey, that's just the way this debate goes. We take on different angles. Now, we also may make the joke we might be doing weekly episodes, but I don't think we're going to be doing another episode this coming week, guys. Super Bowl next Sunday for starters, but there's a bunch of things coming up at the end of the coming week that all have our attention, and all of us want to watch a little bit of that. What are those things, you ask? Well, you'll find out in the bullets, which we taped last night. And that's coming up after this break, when the Anime Roundtable continues on the Six Talk Podcast Network.
Hey folks, my name is Brett and I'm one of the hosts of Skeleton House, an audio-only Let's Play podcast where my two friends Jess...
What is happening? Oh my god!
...and Steve...
Even he looks spooked.
...play through video games, and I edit them, add context, and act as your eyeballs. Also, we have a cat. Come check us out at skeletonhouse.buzzsprout.com or look up Skeleton House on your favorite podcast app. Or your least favorite podcast app. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life.
Looks like we're going to have to redo the first half of the episode, guys. Hopefully this one works.
Well, we've done it before, right, Mike?
Yeah, we've had to redo complete segments in the past.
That's why we always say to come and join us in the audience, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know. It would be a first for the version 2 era, though, for sure. And the radio program now resumes. Nicolas, Austin, Ing, Sharmarke, and Greig continuing the conversation with you. In front of our virtual audience, thank you for listening. And online via the Six Talk Podcast Network, official podcast Anime North. Hello, can you hear us? Hopefully this second segment goes off without a hitch. So we'll all meet up tomorrow to redo the first part?
Sure, why not?
Sure, why
7 a.m. On the dot, right?
Right.
Absolutely, man. When someone says 7, that means morning. If you wanted to say 7 at night, just use the European numbered version.
19 o'clock.
Sure, why not?
19 o'clock. Well done. I'll get the espresso extra strong. Okay. All right. Let's continue then. We'll see if we can recover the first part, but show must go on.
Oh,
Here we
we're
go with this.
acknowledging this. Okay.
Yeah, right now. We'll acknowledge that. Okay, if this episode is up to the listeners, we had a small glitch in taping the first part of the episode. We have to acknowledge it because it makes for a good story anyway. Uh, Kevin's Kevin's file is apparently corrupt or lost, and we're going to try and recover it. Otherwise, failing that, we're going to re-record the entire first part on Sunday.
You know
Okay.
what we could always do, right, Mike? We
What's
could get those people that are dubbing over YouTube videos and see if they could somehow recreate what Kevin said for us on this podcast, if they're
that could be
supposedly that good, even
that
though
could be a
some
hot.
YouTubers are questioning why this is happening.
I say that all the time. Why is this happening? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Okay. Well, we do have the second segment to go, and we did say what it was. Here we go with the bullets. These are little things which may become big things, which somehow may get to 2 hours. Okay. Item. Redo of Healer. So, Rui Tsukiyo tweeted out earlier this week that his light novel series, his current light novel series, if I'm not mistaken, Redo of Healer, has been rejected by English language publishers.
No, English
It had
version,
been.
they tried with one publisher and they were rejected. And this is a Katakawa property. And so
So,
likely they went to Yen Press because Katakawa owns Yen Press. And also because his previous, or one of his series he's also doing at the same time, which is called The World's Finest Assassin Gets Reincarnated in Another World as an Aristocrat. That light novel is being released by Yen Press at present. The first volume just released in December. So you would assume they went to Yen Press again, but because of content of Redo of Healer, which is a very risque series, they decided to refuse license. But that doesn't mean, as he said, if you can say that you want to see it, maybe another publisher will reach out, like maybe One Piece Books, which has done some Katakawa properties like Hinamatsuri or Shield Hero.
yeah, send them a tweet or an email. Uh, yeah, and I guess Redo of Healer has had some attention because the anime has started to air, right?
Correct. And they
Mm-hmm.
had a thing from their their official Twitter account in Japan talking about a content warning because their main image for it, it's like, oh, this is a nice isekai. It's like looks very friendly and all that.
And
Nothing
then
we
I've
haven't
seen
seen
some other.
before.
Then you see some other images if
And
you
then
Google it.
And then they basically said in their official Twitter for the anime, they said this program is fiction and bears no relation to any existing person, place, or organization. Furthermore, the content is not made to endorse any specific way of thinking or belief. The work also includes extreme violence. Children and young people are advised against viewing it. And that's very true because it's a revenge series. Basically, the main character is a healer. He was treated like garbage and crap by his party. And basically, what happens is he uses his power to basically go back in time. And basically, it's a revenge plot where he's trying to get revenge against all these people who treated him like garbage in his previous existence and stuff like that. And it's very as Joey the Anime Man, a YouTuber, said he's been talking about it recently, and he talked about the manga and original light novel last year. He said it's like a dumpster fire; you just can't stop and look away from it.
Or like a NASCAR accident, right? Well, and we must acknowledge Joey the Anime Man. He's one of the hosts of Trash Taste, right?
Correct,
Well, yeah, the most popular podcast going,
and he's
anime
definitely
podcast going right now, right?
popular himself. I think he's got 2.66 million subscribers now. So
That's the reason it's so popular because it takes three well-known content YouTube creators and puts them all, mash them up all together talking anime. So popularity spawns more popularity for something else. Good for them, though.
Yeah, no,
But
they built it over time. And as you said, you never know how YouTube is going to pan out for some people, right?
no guarantees. But it's an interesting. It's an interesting story. I'm trying to remember. Well, first of all, there's another component to this. Something about showing this in Germany. You want
Well,
to
no, that
quickly go
the
with this one?
Germany part is more due to the publisher because they've had issues trying to get some of their content to streamers in Europe before, so I wouldn't worry about that.
Do you think that
But
that part of the story is more a business issue as opposed to a
yeah, it's more a
content
business.
issue?
Yeah, it's more a business issue than a content issue. But this one for Katakawa, it's not surprising that the ones that are streaming it in North America, and I think most of the Western world, English wise, is Sentai's High Dive, and they are streaming the censored version. They're not streaming the uncensored version. And sometimes they have streamed censored and uncensored. So, for example, Peter Grill, they did the uncensored and the censored, but this one, they're only doing the uncensored version, and they're not also putting it on Crunchyroll. It's only on High Dive. But it's interesting because I know going back to Joy the Anime Man, he talked about that there is the uncensored version out there, and it's a lot more graphic there than in the censored version, where it's not just bars of light. Like sometimes you have darkness over most of the screen. You also have long pans, for example, in the second episode of a fireplace, and you're hearing things that you know what's going on, but you can't see it. But in the uncensored version, you can. But obviously, they felt
Oh.
they couldn't go through the same issue they had with interspecies reviewers in Funimation. And High Dive has no problem. They've done stuff like this before.
Hmm. Two titles come to mind when I read this story, and we're going way back when I bring up these two titles. First one was Video Girl Eye, because I know that one of the volumes back then, back in Japan, was actually held back for some interesting content. Although I never really understood the specifics of it, because it had plenty to start. I mean, that's just Masakazu Katsura, the way he does things. The other title I was thinking about was Kite. Because remember, back in the day, we saw 3 versions of that from Media Blasters.
But Kite,
Each version increasing in adult content.
I feel
Sorry.
Kite was a different example because remember, Kite was a hentai first and foremost, and it's like they scaled back because they had so much they could work with just as a story to cut it back and stuff like that.
And they did.
hmm And
And they did.
similar to Mezzoforte, that one
Oh,
as well from the
same
same
thing.
creator.
Hmm.
But that one was interesting where those ones seemed the mature content was just kind of put in. You didn't really need it. Whereas Kite, it kind of was a part of the story and a better way of putting together a story around that type of mature content compared to Redo Healer where it's just kind of there. But
Kind of gratuitous and maybe unnecessary. Like, I
but
mean,
they
I'm not familiar with the title, so I haven't really taken any significant read of it.
yeah, but the other thing with Redo Healer to get back to the light novel being refused by Yen Press, likely, we don't know for sure, but that's likely, is that it's interesting. It's probably, there is the manga and the light novel. Usually they'll get both, but I think likely it was the light novel that tried to get licensed. And it's interesting because usually you'll have a few pictures for the light novel, but I think for this one, they wouldn't have had pictures that crazy in there. It would mostly be content of the written word. And you could think, well, we've had Game of Thrones and other books out there, so it's not like we haven't seen that from other people out there.
Well, yeah,
And
that's the thing, right?
hmm
I mean, we've talked, ecchi content, adult content, and this is just print. And by and large, some of this is just printed word, not
correct.
not as much in the way of actual pictures. But you get
And
plenty of that in Game of Thrones. I
that's
don't know.
why it's interesting on the anime side. It'll be interesting to see how far they go because they went pretty far already. It sounds
Hmm.
like with the uncensored version, it was amazing to me. You get an anime, but I guess if you get enough traction and stuff like that, and you find the right people, someone's going to make it.
I feel like it's been this way for a few years now, where TV shows have just been allowed to be edgier and edgier and show more nudity or show implied sex or even show the sex outright, so long as you don't show the genitals. And like there have been several cases of this in the past several
Yes.
years.
Yes, there has.
Like
The thing
Yoshimura
is,
Sora is one example of that.
mhm. Well, but then it also comes back to remember what we were talking about earlier in the first segment, and this will give it away whichever version goes up. You can ultimately you can only be able to show so much on broadcast television or cable television or traditional forms. And some of it has little to do with content and more to do with, well, it's everybody's trying to get in or you're constricted on time or what have you. And then ultimately, content creators, producers, they're looking at other means to be able to distribute their works, i.e., digitally streaming.
And I guess the other thing you think about too, from the HBO perspective and other premium stations like Showcase, and that is, at one point I know some people talked about they were trying to outsex each other and stuff like that
That's
to
yeah, that's an interesting way to put it.
very not so great degrees in that, and HBO themselves acknowledge this by getting people in to properly like make sure that these sex scenes were done in the right way and stuff like that, that both actors would feel comfortable and that they were portrayed however they were going about them. They didn't just throw them in there like sometimes they had done in the past.
Okay, so what do you think the bottom line is? Do you think this? Do you think redo of Healer, the light novels, will see an English release?
Maybe in the future, you never know. I think One Piece books likely has a likelihood of picking it up. They've had traction getting stuff from Katakawa in regards, as I said before, Hinamatsuri and even Shield Hero. And Shield Hero at the beginning had a few scenes where you kind of were like, "Oh, that's interesting there." But I think you could see them getting it, or maybe they'll go somewhere else. Like maybe J novel, for example, could give a kick at the can at licensing this because they've had the JK Sex Girl in Another World. That light novel was licensed by them, which I read, and it's only one volume, but it's a very interesting series. But in defense of that series or that one novel about JK Sex Girl, it's an isekai. But this girl, you find out, you go through it, that she uses it as a power vehicle throughout the novel you find at the end and stuff like that. So it would be a spoiler if I explained why she became, I guess, a prostitute and is going through this in the other world.
Worth keeping up with. I know you guys are probably more in tune in terms of light novels than I'll be, but interesting story in that sense. All right, let's move on. Item, and this is kind of a disturbing story. Toei Animation has apparently refused to do business with a union negotiator because of misrepresentation due to the fact that the negotiator identifies themselves as an X gender or non binary gender, and in the process uses an alias to better reflect their identity. Furthermore, it's taken another twist because in the process, it has apparently nullified work that the negotiator has completed in that it cost another person a promotion or something to that effect. And Toei, by all accounts, have been very heavy handed in their dealings to this point, only referring to the negotiator by their legally registered name, which this person disregards. And to top it off, the employee who the negotiator had been advocating for has been subjected to various forms of harassment. This is a deep story. And first of all, the first name that comes out to me is Toei Animation. Toei was mentioned in Pure Invention in somewhat not so flattering terms, if I remember correctly. James, you remember?
Yeah, I believe you were correct in that. And remember, they are a long standing brand and stuff like that. And then we also have to factor in how people in Japan, especially probably the older generation, think in regards to these issues and stuff like that.
Well,
And
that's the bigger part of this. I mean, I think it's a reflection of something even deeper in the Japanese system.
and it's on all sides. Like you look at Asan, who is the person that was trying through this union to get their complaint through, and him or her basically has been through the ringer, unstripped of their work as I think it was an animation unit director and stuff like that. They went to an assistant, and then as they were trying to make their complaints and stuff like that, they were basically chastised and berated. And then they did the same thing that they do in many Japanese organizations. And people heard in Konami, where basically they try to make them quit and basically sending them to an undesirable place or trying to basically demote them even further to clerical work or menial work where they're doing nothing related to their job, so they'll quit. And it's kind of
Mhm.
crazy that in Japan they can do that. If you were in the West or in Canada, the States, in certain places doing that, that would be constructive dismissal and you'd be in hot trouble there. But somehow that still continues on in Japan. And then the cherry on top is this with Bison, which is the negotiator for this union, trying to represent this poor person. And they went and did some negotiation over online because of COVID. So they did three meetings online and were able to do it. And then this fourth meeting, they couldn't do online. They didn't get the link, they said. And so they phoned the studio beforehand. They went to the building of Toei to meet the lawyer and the people handling the case. And when they arrived, basically, they spoke aggressively. And then they got a security guard just to chase them out. And then after that, the company, in their correspondence, as you said, they were basically dead naming them. They basically used their legal name in their family register and stuff like that, saying that they were, what was it, like a false name of using a false name, which is
Yeah,
kind of crazy.
they don't recognize the current
And
name,
and
the
as he
alias.
said, that the collective bargaining is an obligation established by the labor union, and there's no matter of trust relationship in regards to this at all. Like this is just literal bullshit, as you could say, especially here because you look in the contract and it's based on the union contract, and so they should have had the right to have them be represented by them regardless. But it's very sad they had to go through that same thing, and it's kind of telling about Toei themselves. And you talk about Asan, who supposedly is still trucking along trying to work for this. I'm surprised. And he said it's kind of telling that they, from the outside, they want to work for Toei. They had this respect for them. And then they go through this and they saw what the negotiator went through and they're just like, what the heck?
Well,
So
it
I'm
feels
amazed they're still trucking along. I would have went somewhere else, but,
But where else would they go? That's the
and that's
kind of
the
sad
problem, right?
thing. Like there's so limited job opportunities for trans and non-binary people in Japan. Especially in a field like that, which is so sad. And I think they mentioned that in the article. Like you can imagine this, person growing up with all this sort of fantasy and escapism, and then all of a sudden, they're working at least adjacent in the industry, and they're essentially shunned. um but there's and it's such a great job, like it's a professional job. Usually when you're thinking about non-binary and trans people working in Japan, they're either they're working at a cafeteria or low level retail, or maybe if they're lucky somewhere in the sort of entertainment industry adjacent kind of fields. But this sort of professional job, you don't see people in those communities represented. So it's such a garbage move by Toei. It's the worst thing they've done in months, and they've done the Digimon Adventure reboot in the last couple months, which was a pretty low bar. um like I'm pretty disgusted, and I'm also disgusted that I know this story is just gonna blow away. um it's not going to raise any huge alarms. Like, it's great that we're talking about it. It's great that there was the article about it, but I think it's just going to get swept under the rug.
It's going to be a long push, as we say, for people to accept it, definitely in other parts of the world and stuff like that. And you just got to keep on talking, and it's the long haul. And as we said, the thing is, some of it are these older generations. We could talk about dead naming, we could talk about changing your gender, we could talk about Elliot Page and many others, but it just goes over their head. It's like we're talking Martian to them, you know what I mean? But the
It's
other
it's
thing, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's just that it's complicated because Japan has had such a incredibly long history with I guess gender identity in general. Like, if you look in, all the way back to the ancient times, they had a completely different view of things until Western influence. But even like you know it's been fairly legal to be a trans person in Japan, or non-binary, but they're so archaic in their restrictions. Like, you can't have had a child, or you can't have a child under 18 or something like that. Similar to some other countries, you need to have surgery, or all these kind of things, which make it incredibly difficult for non-binary or people who can't medically transition. But the fact that they address this in their laws and saying, okay, yes, you can have your gender being reassigned, it's more than some other countries. So, like, I don't think Japan deserves a lot of credit here, but they're not completely in the dark ages. I think this is willful ignorance and really wanting, like, it is an active choice by the older generations to not change. It's not just Japan's normal slowness to change. I think there's some malicious intent here to some degree, at the very least.
I just say I think of it as just taking advantage of the present system. Toei,
Yeah.
the way I look at it
That is true
For
too,
Toei,
yeah.
they know they can, like, what good is there for them to benefit, say, Asan? And yeah, these are the aliases of the two people we mentioned. The negotiators referred to as Bisan. The employee they were advocating for is Asan.
And we should mention, just because I know Jeff said it, just to let you know, Jeff, it wasn't the person at Toy, it was the negotiator that
Okay.
was the non-binary. But even still, that is terrible. And even the person they were advocating for, ASON, as you said, they probably wouldn't leave their job because these people might have connections and might badmouth them somewhere else. So it's cyclical, right? The Japanese society, certain
And
ways
there
of
and
thinking.
there's a pride there too. Like, they wouldn't want to leave their job,
Oh yeah, that too.
even
It's
if
like,
they
why
were.
did you leave your job, right? And then
Yeah,
how do you explain that?
Oh
even if
yeah,
even if they were belittled or pushed to, like, the most undesirable branch of the company. Like, I saw that happen, or I heard about that happening in Japan, even in the education sector. What James was mentioning about giving them the worst jobs, or the worst tasks, like that kind of thing, is what happens in order to try to push these people out. I'm just surprised how petty Toei is. Like, it would have been so little effort for them to at least not dead name them, even if they, the grammar of how Japanese works might be different, or the formalities of things might have been, you couldn't use gender neutral language, or you couldn't just refer to the name. Well, I guess the name is the dead naming. That was the problem. But it would have been so little effort for them to just not do it, but they decided.
oh yeah, that's a
Yeah,
theme,
for
right?
the negotiator, and some of them
That's
probably don't even realize they did it. And some of that comes from just, sorry, Mike.
was yeah.
One
I'm
point
just
was thinking about Atlas and what they did in the original Catherine, where they dead named a character and they just didn't even care. And the other thing is the
Oh,
localization. They're the ones that fixed it in the remake, Catherine Full Body, which released last year. I'm not sure if they even fixed it in the Japanese version, which I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't, is they don't fully grasp what's going on.
well, yeah. It's, as I said, it's just a tech. To me, it's just taking advantage of the way the system is. Like, it's partly like discrimination. It's partly, in your face discrimination, but I also think it's just taking advantage of a systemic discrimination issue within. And as I said, that just says something more about Japanese society. It's it's an either or. You're either a male or a female, but the culture and in turn the legal system does not allow for anything in between at this point. And obviously perceptions will have to change, but we constantly mention how backwards sometimes Japanese society can be, and this is another reflection of that. But this is a bigger issue, and we hate thinking about other societies being discriminatory, but it's there all the time. Japan has its issue with xenophobia. So this story is sad to hear in one sense, but not the somehow you just don't feel too surprised either.
Not surprised at all.
Mm-hmm.
It
And
tells us that
It's
we have
saddening.
a long way to go and stuff like that. And there are many other places across the world we can name off, like in Africa, in Russia, in China, and other places where it's the same thing could be happening and stuff like that. And then the other problem is there could be bad actors from our part of the world that don't agree and have given up on North America or other places in Europe and are going here spreading these awful ideas and stuff like that. And we have to stand up and fight up and say, this isn't like some Western idea or something we came up with. This is human rights. Trans rights are human rights, and
Mm-hmm.
they all deserve to live in peace.
And places like Canada, to a degree, to the US, parts of Europe, yeah, there it could be better too here, but a lot of them would take that. A lot of people in the LGBT community would take this as a starting point.
it's a risk though. That's the issue. Like with America, Canada, UK, and I mention this all the time to people who ask about like the LGBT situation in Japan. There's much less risk of being murdered in Tokyo for being a trans person, but there's also less possibility of having a good job. So it's this weird situation. If you have the opportunity to even choose one or the other, do you want the risk of compared to like somewhere like
Yeah,
New York?
you're yeah, you know what? And we say this in race too, so I stand corrected. So really it becomes a pick your poison then.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So which one is it? And
It's hope versus safety, really. Um, like, do you want to be able to live your dreams, or do you want to be guaranteed you won't, be beat up? Because that will almost never happen in Japan. You're not going to get shot or beat up. I don't want to say never, because I'm sure it does happen, but it's much less of a fear. Just from what I've seen and read.
fair point. Point taken. Thank you. And as I said, I stand corrected. I stand corrected in that sentiment.
I guess the other thing I would worry about too is that in Japan, and it happens across the world too, is the mental stress, right? That probably people will be saying hateful things, and how much can you take of those hateful things before you think negative thoughts, and hopefully they don't decide to take their life and stuff like that. Is Japan does have a high suicide rate, so that's something
Okay.
I would worry about.
And sadly, I doubt that Japan has a lot of records on trans and non-binary suicide rates. Their rate is fairly high, anyways. And I don't think I haven't researched it, but I doubt there's that research to see, and that's my being standing corrected. Because that's definitely an equal risk of death, if not greater, within the community. So
Well, there's the either or type thing.
As
yeah,
you say, we all got to try and pull together, right? And sometimes it's the long road you have to take. You don't make these type of cultural changes and these generational shifts in one day, 1 month, or 1 year. It takes decades and stuff like that. And we've seen that even this year with racial tensions in the States and other places, right?
Mm-hmm. Just keep going. All you can just do is just stand up. Well, from that to something a little bit more, well, both equal parts lighthearted and outrageous.
I thought it
So in the
was
time,
more that people across the world can be equally idiotic in this COVID age, right?
yes, so in the time of COVID, you knew there would be a story of people in high privilege and responsibility doing something they shouldn't in Japan. And this was the case when two Japanese politicians decided to visit a hostess bar. And these were from the ruling party. And it eventually, and when it was uncovered, Yoshihide Suga, the prime minister, had to issue an apology on behalf of these elected officials, Kiyohiko Toyama and Jun Matsumoto. Probably not that Jun Matsumoto, if you know who I'm referring to in that sense. Because, that Jun Matsumoto probably wouldn't need to be going to a hostess bar for female company. What do we want to say about this one? Like, I
Well,
mean, I guess every country has a version of this, right?
How did they get caught?
That's a good question, actually.
probably like anything else, like someone saw them or someone saw that this host club was basically operating outside the normal hours because this happened in Tokyo where there is a COVID state of emergency and there are rules now. So that's why it's a thing, just like the different politicians across Canada, states, and other places basically traveling to Hawaii or Caribbean or other places where they shouldn't be when there's stay at home orders. And so for Tokyo, for example, they said restaurants are supposed to be shuttered by 8 p.m. each night. So probably they were beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they deserve it then.
Well, they deserve at least the public. What's the word?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Shaming.
Public
why,
criticism, being dragged through the mud. Kevin.
see, if they had half a brain, they'd do delivery health services instead.
Oh, for God's sakes!
Is there a curbside version?
Because then you just go to someone's residence and then you wouldn't be so suspiciously seen. You could just be going into air quotes a relative's place to check in on them. That could be the excuse you used. But no, you had to go to an establishment where you know those places are.
I'm sure they weren't going through the front door.
Oh boy.
Like, come on. Be smart, guys.
I think it's
If you're
like some
really
of
gonna
those
do that
bars.
kind of shit, be smart about it.
Well, as I said, politicians have had versions of. We've had versions of this going around. Politicians, and people in privilege. On that note, let's do the Canadian COVID update, or at least in Ontario, which hasn't been a. In terms of new cases, at least in Ontario, it's been a subtle week. We've, for the most part, for the much of the week, the number of new daily cases in Ontario have straddled either side of 2,000. I think today it was just slightly over. I think the bigger number is number of deaths due to COVID, and that's stayed at 50 or roughly 50. And then today it was at 76 for Ontario. That's one of the concerns. ICU capacity is, well, we're reaching it. I think more than 300 are in ICU, with more than 200, like 2/3 of them on ventilators. That's the Ontario picture, and that's not all, and that's not the whole story. At least in terms of what happened in Canada today, there's been the two other big stories, at least in the last 48 hours, have been vaccine shipments shortages, because Canada has been short shipped in terms of vaccines coming in. For reference, Canada doesn't have factories to make their vaccines. They have to depend on shipments from Europe. But there were no shipments of one vaccine last week, and they'll be short shipped on the other one. There have been two approved for Canada, and they'll be short shipped on the other one in the coming week. And then there's this growing sentiment of the EU, because the vaccines are being produced in Belgium, trying to hold back shipments for the future, just to make sure they're seen to see to themselves as in the first place. Mo.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this story is kind of wild, man. The director of the Who was talking about it too, saying how like you're basically going to create like economic bubbles, I guess. Like certain regions will get it before other regions will mean still get an advantage of the economy and whatnot, and how you're just gonna like decimate total economies. Like right now they're saying that like it's just gonna be ridiculous. It's so short sighted and so just bad, you know. Like we should all just gang up and tell Germany no again, right? I think that's what's happening.
Then we
Well,
have
as I said,
the
that's
variants too that are being talked
yeah.
about as well, and that modeling about it being some of those variants becoming more prevalent in the future, I guess.
Yes, that was. I guess that's another key thing. Ontario had an updated on the modeling for how the pandemic could go, and yes, they could see the numbers. Like right now, the numbers are okay, but then they think the variant will have something to say in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a concern there.
Lockdown version 3, guys, it's coming.
It makes you
Well,
wonder. We're still in the second one.
yeah. You can't really call for a third lockdown when we haven't even gotten out of the second.
No, I just did. I'm saying how like we're gonna get out of this lockdown, a new variant's gonna show up, and then lockdown 3.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, and then that's not the rest of the story for Canada. They announce tomorrow, Sunday, there there's going to be a ban on flights, like Canadian airline flights to warm spots, to sunny destinations.
Just the warm spots, guys. Just the warm.
Yeah, just the warm spots, right? There's
But you can
no
go to the
escape.
warm spots in the States.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
then try and get back in, and then they'll force you into a 14-day quarantine in a hotel of their choosing, high prices, $2,000
That was
on your dime.
ridiculous, man. That was so infuriating.
Well, that's the thing is, it's supposed to be a deterrent.
I mean, no, don't get me wrong. I'm totally for the whole hotel quarantining. If you leave the country for whatever reason, I'm cool with all of that.
On your dime, right?
That's where it gets a bit dicey. I feel like
it
should be
it's not just on your dime. They get to choose it, and it's a pretty high price.
It should be like half your dime, like a reasonable amount of dime or something.
Or at least, yeah, I guess I get that.
And that's why you don't go on vacation if you don't need to.
As I said, that's supposed to be part of the deterrent.
Now, if you had to go for a real reason, then that sucks. But if you're just, I'm going to go to Jamaica for a week. Yeah, then you know what? Well, assuming you didn't plan it months in advance. So if you plan it months in advance, then I can sort of get it. But
okay,
come on, people.
The reason is we've been in this for a while, so you shouldn't really be hopping on a plane. That's why we're forcing people to pay. But other countries that had done this before, like, for example, Australia, where they were quarantining people in hotels and stuff like that, was due to the fact that some of that was before it finally hit them in March. So they were kind of stranded, so to speak. So basically they said, okay, you guys aren't going to be paying this full thing for quarantining in a quarantine hotel before you go home. But some of them are still stranded because they have to get the flights to get them to Australia, and not all of them have gotten back supposedly. So it's kind of crazy.
Well,
I feel like the whole hotel thing should have been in place months ago.
Everybody's saying that one.
You would have thought so, but hey, this is how life goes, right? Everyone does it differently.
Well, yeah.
If this was in place, we wouldn't have the UK variant in Canada, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
But remember that first UK variant in Ontario, the person lied to them. They had to do further investigation before they realized they had been in contact with someone from the UK. So that just tells you people are nuts. And they'll do whatever they feel, even though it just does not make any sense. You got to be responsible. You can't be flying off the handle, which people think, oh, I'm just going to do whatever I want, right? Even though we're still in a serious predicament.
Collectivism versus individualism.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? And we went through this whole Canadian COVID update without talking about a couple from Vancouver. Okay.
You know what we could talk about, Mike? We could talk about video games, and I was laughing because remember we had talked off air about the PS5 and the chaos at the Tokyo retailer of Yobobashi camera, and they were trying to sell, I think, 300 to 500 PS5s there, and it was first come, first serve. And
Mm-hmm.
that turned into a mess of people trying to get one, to say the least. A lot more chaotic than that Animal Crossing incident way back in March for EB Games in downtown Toronto, where it was just people in a very polite line.
Yes, well, that the polite line, that's Canadian. Never thought of it. Well, I think we'll just let the video speak for itself. We'll put up the link. Okay.
The video did make me nostalgic for Japanese stores. I was never in one quite that busy, but just the setup was kind of nicely nostalgic. Just sort of looking past the crowd of people into the distance in the video was kind of
Yeah,
nice.
well, that made me nostalgic for when it was safe to be in such crushes. But this was happening recently.
Yeah, during when they were, as we said, in Tokyo in a
Yeah,
COVID state of emergency. So it's
I
like,
know.
what
I
were they
know.
even thinking doing this as an in-store thing and doing it? It almost looks like it was normal, regardless of them having masks. It's like, just makes you question everything altogether. But it almost looked like those stories you hear. I'm not sure if Geoff was on any of those trains in Japan where they just push them on. You know what I mean? That's what I was
Mhm.
thinking.
I
Okay.
was never pushed.
Last thought.
But
Oh, you never pushed.
Never
Okay, that's
pushed.
the one thing that you didn't see in the video is that the riot part of it probably started because someone offered them an Xbox Series X instead of a PS5, which
good. Oh my
started the chaos.
And that's when they called the police because the police actually shut them down. I'm surprised they didn't ticket them too, probably.
Oh boy.
Oh,
Okay.
it's sad.
Anyway, well, from that to still a rather light story, and the last bullet we'll have, but a kind of a nice one. Yen Press has licensed Megumi Hayashibara's memoir. The characters taught me everything, living life one episode at a time. That's the title of her memoir. I didn't even know she was writing one. Kevin passed this one along. I mean, well, first of all, is there something you want to say about it, Kevin? Aside from you wanted to make sure I saw this.
Well, I guess it's interesting just to see like how long she's lasted in this industry. I
Mhm.
truth be told I don't remember a lot of her roles. I never claimed to have been a big fan of her.
Yes.
But I've always heard her name out and about. I'm sure if I look through her name on ANN right now, which I will in a moment,
I
I'll
think
find some
they
reference.
had a list of her major roles
And
in the
obviously, and the
series. Matt.
cover of the memoir is like a compilation of all of pictures of all her famous characters.
And
Lena Inverse, Slayers.
Oh,
We can
Ray
start to go down the
Ayanov,
list just a little bit. Female Ranma
Anna from
is
Shaman King, Jessie from
Jesse,
Pokemon.
yeah, Jesse from Pokemon.
Ray
that
Valentine. So they had all the major ones. Paprika, of course, she played
Yeah,
that.
Ray Anami, and Eva.
I
Like she's had some very iconic roles.
And I think the cover does a good job of illustrating just the variety of roles, like for every sort of age group and genre and target audience. I
Hmm.
think she's maybe reached more people as far as like the anime industry than a lot of other voice actors. Like I'm not sure if there's any that has branched out quite that far with that many sort of iconic roles. It's I think it's fairly impressive.
Yeah, it is. I'd say so. And I guess there's a bias on my part because I got into it in to anime in the '90s and Megumi Hayashibara's heyday. She is to a lot of the older fans, maybe one of the goats, one of the greatest of all time. But I'm trying to think of who would have been considered the Japanese voice actress of the since then. So let's say of the aughts and of the last decade. who could be in that conversation. Like the one name that comes to mind I can think of in the aughts is Yui Horie, the woman who played Naru in Love Hina, and coincidentally Megumi Hashibara was in that as well, playing the aunt.
Mm-hmm.
And she was in Fruits Basket, and she was in Toradora. And she's still fairly active now, but that's one person I can think of who could be representative of a decade in terms of voice actresses. And then the last decade, which I haven't kept up with, I'm pretty sure there are names there too.
Yeah, I haven't kept up with the
Nana
recent
Mizuki?
voice actors.
I was gonna say Nana Mizuki was probably. I don't know about currently,
Yeah.
but I think for the 2000s, I would have like. I
She'd be in
couldn't.
there too?
Yeah, I
I would
couldn't.
say
Probably.
2000s for Nana Mizuki
Yeah, I
As
couldn't
well.
tell you a role, but I definitely have heard the name, and I don't really pay attention to names, so I think that that probably says something.
So yeah, you
and
can make
she's more
that. So
prolific as a singer now anyway.
yeah, that's the other thing. And as I said, you can make an argument for a couple names in the aughts. And the last decade, I can't say I would be able to, but then again, I'm not in that know.
Like I know
But
Kana
Megumi,
Hanazawa got pretty big, but I don't know if it was at that level.
mhm,
But usually
but
you'll know if a voice actress gets prolific enough if you don't see them voice acting in as many new shows because they would eventually price themselves out of the market, so to speak.
that's one way to put it. But yeah, what's the release date on the memoir? Memoir comes out digitally in both Japanese and English. It's a simultaneous release on February 20th digitally. But I think this is one of those cases for me. I'll wait for for a physical copy.
It'll be interesting to see if we get a physical copy. Hopefully, with the Unpressed, that'll happen because I'm thinking back that J Novel Club, they released a small memoir from Mary Okada, and that was titled From Truant to Anime Screenwriter My Path to Anohana and the Anthem of the Heart. And that's only released digitally by them. They haven't done a physical release. So
Mm,
hopefully, this one from Young Press will come physical, but it's great we're seeing more of these different
autobiographies.
autobiographic
We're all.
works from different creators and different people. We've seen it through Seven Seas and other people of just normal mangaka doing memoir type works, and some of them start on Twitter, and then people find them, and they've been released digitally and physically.
Mhm. Okay, so that's the bullets. And one last thing before we go tonight. And let's do the anime community calendar. We haven't done it in a little while, and there's some worthwhile things that are there now that'll probably end by the time this gets up, but we should mention it anyway, and things upcoming. The one thing that we know is probably going to be unavailable by the time people listen to this is the Songs of Tokyo 2020 festival, which had been on video on demand on NHK World's website for the last couple months. We mentioned it before. It's not as if this is a revelation to anybody, but it had been running and it had been showing on NHK World on their website and services. And I actually, knowing that it was going to expire at the end of Sunday, watched all four parts again. And I would have said, really interesting thing to watch, especially with names like Baby Metal, Hinazaka 46, compilations from Bangladesh and the Idol Master, right down to messages of hope from the aforementioned Nana Mizuki. And we can go on. I can go on and on about it. We did put a link in the Twitter. Maybe you can see the lineup. But for any J-pop and J-rock fans, I think the bookend parts 1 and 4, would have been more to your liking, especially since it culminated with a performance by Hotier, who is best known for the theme song from Kill Bill, and that was he performed that at the very end of it. And then parts 2 and 4 would probably be more directed towards anime fans. The producers really know who their target is and arrange the lineup as such. So Songs of Tokyo will expire on video on demand NHK World at the end of Sunday, January 31st. Second thing I want to quickly mention, we got to go through this because we got to end off pretty soon now. We mentioned the Japan Film Festival Plus back in December because one of the presentations back in December when it was being shown in the US was the panel between Matt Alt and Fred Schott, and that was in the shadow of a movie being shown that night about Mazinger, about the Mazinger hangar. I think I forgot the exact title. Let me just quickly look that up. Never mind. Anyway, yeah, I know it's just going to take me a couple seconds to find it. Yes, Project Dreams: How to Build Mazinger Z's Hangar. That was shown. What we didn't realize at the time was it was only being shown in the States, but Canada would be reserved for a later date. That date is coming. It'll start on February 5th. We'll put a link up. And actually, the kickoff movie for the Canadian version of the Japan Film Festival Plus online festival will be Project Dreams. And you have to sign up online, and once a movie is made available, you will only have 24 hours to watch it. So there's like 2 to 3 little movies each day. All of them are interesting, and obviously there'll be 1 or 2 that probably will appeal to you guys. It's free if you're in Canada, and where else? Canada, Mexico, and Brazil. They're showing it from February 5th to 14th. We'll put the link up from the Japan Foundation Toronto website, and probably the direct link into the festival itself. From the Japan Foundation Toronto to the Japan Foundation New York, as mentioned before, there has been an ongoing series, Academic Perspectives on Japanese Pop Culture. They had been doing a series since September. Already 4 parts had been done. They had talked about Eva and Ghost in the Shell and identity crises depicted in that. They had talked about music and anime. In part 4 of their series, they talked about Satoshi Kon and his legacy, and they were doing this through academic and professional perspectives. They just did one this week, and it was on Sailor Moon to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the manga, or 30 years since the manga came out, or something to that effect. So they talked with translators and other journalists about Sailor Moon's impact over the years. We'll put up the YouTube video of the presentation. It was a 2-hour-long presentation, and we would also suggest to subscribe to the Japan Foundation New York's YouTube page, if only because you'll be able to get access to the past editions of the academics and Japanese pop culture series. The last item on the list, and then we'll call it a night, was only made known to us within the last couple hours, and James was the one who discovered it. James.
Yes, Discotheque Media on their Twitter feed announced earlier this evening on January 30th that next weekend, on Saturday, February the 6th, at 9 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time on their Twitch channel, they're going to do the dub world premiere of Memories. And that one is the one that Justin Zemeckis, I know, is helping produce that. And they said in their second online panel, that they were going to announce later when they were going to do something like that on their Twitch channel. So that'll be fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. So there it is. Well, Discotheque had been hyping it, and we'll find out what the hype is about next Saturday. We'll put a link up in the notes, and we'll probably retweet Discotheque's tweet as well. And I think that's about it. You guys have anything to add? Since we had to rush, we pretty much had to rush through the calendar.
Oh, well, one quick thing here.
Mm-hmm. And keep it short, otherwise we're going over 2 hours for sure. No, go ahead.
So Kodansha USA made another slew of new manga licenses, and Yet only one of them is getting a physical print. And, as a physical collector, it's just, I really just don't like how, like, a lot of these new licenses from Kodansha are just not getting printed. It's always they always dangle the carrot of saying, if the digital only release does well, then we may consider doing a print release. But man, like, I just don't like buying digital only releases unless it's dirt ass cheap. Like, I'd rather just own a book. And very few of those digital releases have made it to print or had that duo release off the bat.
Haven't they done that for a number of years? Like when they had, because they're now combined now in New York, but remember they were separate entities like Kodansha Digital in San Francisco and then Kodansha USA in New York and stuff like that. And they were doing the exact same thing where a lot of stuff seemed to be digital first. And then if it did well enough, they'd have the physical release. And then a lot of the physical releases that were announced were just a lot of bigger properties that you knew would probably have gotten them anyway.
Yeah.
Well, it's as I said, it's just a sign of the times, I suppose. But I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all kind of old school in the sense, even me, and I tend to be, I've come okay with a lot of aspects of digital, except maybe the recording. But shaking off the physical media side of me is proving a little harder too. But I get where you're coming from, Kevin.
Like, if I'm reading digital, I prefer doing subscriptions. Like, I'll admit, I bought into a couple of those Humble bundles because I really don't think we'll ever see Space Brothers in print. And I don't think Kasane would have ever been printed at this point. So
yeah,
I
the
caved for
longer
those.
titles.
But granted, it was at such an affordable price, plus some of it was going to charity, that I made those exceptions.
Well, that's where we are. Okay. But I as I said, I respect the frustration.
Yeah.
All right. That's about it. I guess. Nice to do a weekly episode. Let's see what we can. Let's see what version comes out in the first part, and we'll leave it up to the listeners to figure out which version it is.
A choose your own adventure.
Well, they'll be similar. Trust me.
I thought we were leaving it up to the podcasting gods.
Well, that too. We'll talk to. I'll send an email to Zencaster in the morning. And that's all we got for this episode. Once again, if you like what you heard, we'd love to hear from you. AnimeRoundtable@gmail.com, @AnimeRoundtable on Twitter and Instagram. AnimeRoundtable.com is our website. If this is up on YouTube, oh wait, it won't be. But
if it's up on YouTube, like and subscribe and smash that button.
Yeah, smash that button. Please like and subscribe. And of course, please do the same and subscribe and review us wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, etc., so you can be notified whenever we put up new recordings.
And it really helps us out, too.
We do episodes for the most part bi-weekly, but we might for the next little while, as the pandemic continues, go weekly. Who knows? As soon as we can get the bugs figured out. Until next time, good night from Toronto. Join us again for another edition of the Anime Roundtable. How do you think that went?
You're still recording.